Some people post everything: their thoughts, their meals, their relationships, their lives. And then there's another type of person. They're there, but you don't see them. No updates, no stories, no highlights. You might even wonder, are they hiding something, or do they just not care? But what if the truth is something deeper? Because people who don't post on social media aren't always disengaged. Sometimes they're just wired differently. We live in a world where visibility feels like existence. If it's not posted, did it even happen? Birthdays, achievements, vacations, relationships, everything is documented, shared, and validated. And over time, this creates an unspoken rule. To be seen is to matter. So when someone chooses not to participate in that system, it feels unusual, almost suspicious. People assume things. They're private. They're antisocial. They're boring. But psychology tells a very different story. Because not posting is rarely random. It's a pattern, and patterns always come from somewhere. There's a quiet moment that reveals this perfectly. Imagine two people on vacation. One is constantly taking photos, adjusting angles, capturing the perfect shot. The other is just there, watching the sunset, feeling the air, saying nothing. Later that night, one uploads a highlight. The other keeps the moment to themselves. Now here's the question. Who experienced it more deeply? And that's where the first psychological layer appears. Some people don't post because they don't need external validation. They don't feel the urge to turn experiences into content. Not because they don't enjoy life, but because they don't measure it through other people's reactions. Their sense of fulfillment comes from the experience itself, not from how it's perceived. And that difference is subtle, but powerful. Because when your brain isn't trained to seek validation externally, you move differently. You don't think, how will this look? You think, how does this feel? And that shift changes everything. There's another pattern that often shows up. People who don't post tend to value privacy more than most. Not in a fearful way, but in a protective way. To them, not everything needs to be shared. Not every moment needs an audience. Not every emotion needs to be explained. Because they understand something that many people overlook. The more you expose, the more vulnerable you become. And for some, that vulnerability isn't worth it. Maybe they've learned this through experience. Maybe they've been judged before, misunderstood, or had personal moments turned into public opinions. So they adapt. They keep their life contained. Not hidden, just selective. And this creates a kind of quiet boundary, a separation between their inner world and the outside world. But here's where it gets interesting. Some people don't post, not because they're private, but because they're observant. They spend more time watching than sharing. They notice patterns, behavior, energy. They see how people present themselves online and how different that is from reality. And that awareness changes how they engage. Because once you see the gap between what people show and what they actually live, it becomes harder to participate in it. It starts to feel that performative. Not fake, but curated. And for someone who values authenticity, that can feel uncomfortable. So instead of joining in, they step back. They observe. They stay quiet. There's also a deeper psychological reason that doesn't get talked about enough. Some people don't post because they don't feel the need to prove anything. Think about it. A lot of social media is built around signaling. Success, happiness, connection, status, even subtly. But people who feel secure in themselves don't feel the same pressure to signal. They don't need to show their life to validate it. They don't need others to confirm what they already feel. And that doesn't mean they're more confident than everyone else. But it does mean their identity isn't built on external feedback. And that creates a kind of quiet independence. The kind that doesn't need to be seen. There's a real-life example that captures this perfectly. You meet someone new. They're interesting, thoughtful, grounded. You go to look them up, and there's almost nothing. No recent posts, no constant updates, just silence. And it feels strange, because in a world where everyone is constantly visible, invisibility feels like mystery. But often, it's not mystery. It's intention, because they've chosen what to share and what to keep. And that choice is psychological. There's also another side to this. Not posting can sometimes come from emotional fatigue. Social media requires energy, attention, engagement. And for some people, especially those who think deeply or feel intensely, that can be draining. They don't want to perform. They don't want to maintain an online presence. They don't want to constantly translate their life into something shareable. So they opt out. Not because they're disconnected, but because they're protecting their mental space. And this is where it connects to something bigger. Attention. In a world that constantly pulls your focus outward. Some people choose to keep it inward, to stay present, to think, to process, to exist without interruption, and not posting becomes part of that. It's not resistance, it's preference. But here's where it becomes more complex. Not everyone who doesn't post is doing it from confidence or clarity. For some, it comes from something else. Discomfort, insecurity, overthinking. They hesitate before posting. They analyze how it will be perceived. They worry about judgment, and instead of navigating that discomfort, they avoid it entirely. So silence becomes a form of protection, not expression. And this is important, because the behavior looks the same, but the reason behind it is completely different. One comes from self-assurance, the other comes from self-doubt, and only the person themselves knows which one it is. There's also something subtle that happens over time. People who don't post often experience life differently. They're not documenting everything, so they remember things differently. They're not interrupting moments to capture them, so they stay in them longer. They're not constantly comparing their lives to others online, so their sense of reality becomes quieter, more personal, less influenced. And that can create a kind of mental clarity that's hard to explain, because they're not living in two worlds. The real one and the digital one. They're just living in one. And that simplicity has value. But it also creates distance. Because in a world where connection often happens online, not participating can make you feel slightly outside, less visible, less connected. And that's the trade-off, because every choice has one. You gain privacy, but lose visibility. You gain presence, but lose exposure. And not everyone is willing to make that trade, but some are. And that says something about how they see the world. Not everything needs to be shared. Not everything needs to be seen. Not everything needs to be validated. Some things can just exist, quietly, privately, completely. And maybe that's what makes these people so interesting. They remind us of something we've slowly forgotten. That life doesn't need an audience to be real. That meaning doesn't come from being seen, but from being experienced. And if you've ever felt like this, like you don't quite fit into the constant noise of sharing, like you prefer to observe more than you express, like your life feels more real when it's not posted, then maybe there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe you're just operating from a different place. One that values depth over display, presence over performance, and meaning over attention. And if this made you feel understood, even a little, then maybe you've already realized something most people don't question. And if you want more of these conversations, the kind that help you see yourself more clearly, you might want to stay around, not for validation, but for understanding.